Here are 5 numbers real estate investors need to know. Number 1 is net operating income, also known as NOI. You'll hear NOI a lot by lenders because that is actually the number that they use to evaluate your property's performance. Why do they use this number and not cash flow? Because NOI gives them a picture of whether this property is operating regardless of financing. So you can compare apples to apples when you're looking at a property without financing, because what happens is you could get better financing. So let's say I'm Kat and I have a property with 8.75% interest. That property might not cash flow, right? But then comes Anna and buys that property and she gets a 5% interest rate. The same property is going to cash flow better because her financing terms are better. But the idea is if the property itself is performing, then financing is different. And this is going to come into play when we talk about DSCR. Then there's cash flow. Now, I want to make a distinction between operating cash flow and net cash flow. And operating cash flow is really cash flow before CapEx. And the reason why I like to make that distinction is because sometimes we may have a property that had 2 rough years because all of the deferred maintenance items came due. Ideally, when you buy a property, you want to attack the CapEx items so you don't have to deal with them later on. But, we're real estate investors, we're cheap. So sometimes we decide, okay, I'm just not going to fix the AC now, even though I know that this is a 1990s AC. And then you're surprised when the expense happens, right? But let's say you had this property and for 2 years, you had to do deferred maintenance items. These are going to be your capital expenditures, your CapEx, so HVAC, roofing, all these things. But you don't replace roofs every year, right? These are 15, 20-year items. So you know that once you spend that money, you're not going to spend it again. So when you're looking at operating cash flow, it really helps you decide whether this property is a winner or not, because you can look at net cash flow and it might look ugly, but you really have to see, okay, is this a CapEx issue or is this an operating issue? And that's where it helps you figure that out. Now, the next number is cash on cash. And most investors know cash on cash, but the question is, are you calculating cash on cash post-acquisition? I think a lot of people calculated at the beginning and it looked great and, this 20% cash on cash return. But if you actually run your numbers and you look at what your actual cash on cash return is today, really still 20%? The answer is probably not. I have noticed that 95% of the time, our numbers do not actually match the expectations. Now, some people would be like, I bought the property and I refinanced it and I did the BRRRR method, buy, rehab, refinance, and repeat. And I completely took all my money out. But here's the thing that a lot of people forget to take into account 2 years, 3 years down the road. What happened when you had a CapEx repair of $30,000 that the property didn't cover? Where'd that money come from? That's your cash, right? So that is one of the things that I think a lot of people forget to account for. These investments that we have to do for the properties post-closing that end up being cash in the deal, but we're like, well, it's not our original cash in the deal. It still matters because you still want to know how much money is still in the deal, right? Now, return on equity is one of my favorite ways to really evaluate whether a property should be kept in my portfolio or not. Return on equity is calculated based on your equity in the property. So if you bought the property and it has appreciated over the years, there's some cash in there that continues to grow. And if you're not tapping into it via refinances or HELOCs, then that money is just sitting there doing nothing. So I run this every year to make sure that my properties, that my money is working as hard as it should. If you do not know how to calculate return on equity, make sure you go to my last video on this. But essentially the formula is net cash flow divided over equity. And equity is calculated as your market value minus your current loan balance. So if the property is supposed to be worth $500,000 and you have a $300,000 loan, your equity is $200,000. Now, that being said, the last number is DSCR. A lot of people don't think about DSCR ratio much, but your lenders do. If you are getting into the world of DSCR loans, meaning you're no longer able to borrow conventional loans because you have too many properties, you're going to have to go into what's called a DSCR lender. And these people are going to calculate your DSCR ratio. And really what this number says is, can the property afford to pay for its mortgage? And sometimes you'll be surprised to find out that your property does not. Your margins are so thin that you could barely get to a DSCR ratio that's acceptable for a lender. The average DSCR ratio that lenders are requesting these days is 1.35 to 1.5, depending on your entire risk profile, your credit score, all that stuff. So it's really important to know, because when you're thinking on, okay, I have all this equity on my property and I want to refinance, you have to be mindful that you might not be allowed to take all your money out, because doing so will increase your debt to income ratio. And so it's going to be like, oh, your DSCR ratio is too high because you're borrowing too much and the property is no longer able to afford it. So those are the 5 numbers. Of course, this is a high level overview, but I do have a financial playbook that I am linking below where you can get more information and details on how to calculate these numbers, how to do a whole financial review for your real estate books. And I will be making more videos on how to look at these numbers more in detail in later videos. So make sure you subscribe to stay tuned.